My name is Brielle Donovan and I'm 28 years old. The night my parents humiliated my 5-year-old son, something inside me didn't just break. It went completely silent. And if you've ever experienced real pain, you know silence is far more dangerous than anger. It doesn't explode right away. It waits. It plans. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself the way I usually would. I just watched. And I remembered everything. We were sitting at their polished oak dining table, the one my mother treated like a symbol of perfection, where every fork had to align and every smile had to be fake enough to pass as real. My son, Ethan, sat beside me, his small hands gripping the edge of his chair, his legs swinging nervously beneath the table. He was excited earlier, asking me if Grandma would hug him this time, if Grandpa would finally talk to him. I lied and said yes. I always lied to protect him. Dinner started normally, or at least what passes for normal in my family. My father talked endlessly about my younger sister Chloe and her latest achievements, her promotion, her perfect life, her upcoming engagement party. My mother nodded proudly, adding little details to make it all sound even more impressive. And me, I sat there, invisible, like I had my entire life. Ethan tried to join the conversation once, his tiny voice breaking through the noise. "Mom, can I tell them what I drew today?" he asked, hopeful, smiling. My mother didn't even look at him. She simply sighed, slow and sharp, like his voice was an inconvenience. "Not now, Ethan. Adults are talking," she said coldly, cutting him off mid-breath. The smile on his face didn't disappear instantly. It faded, slowly, painfully, like something dimming inside him. I felt it, that shift, that quiet little heartbreak that no child should ever have to feel. My hand tightened around my fork, but I still said nothing. Then my father laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind that lands like a slap. "He's too sensitive," he said, shaking his head, just like his mother, always desperate for attention. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were new, but because they were being passed down, like some cruel family tradition. Ethan looked at me, confused, searching my face for understanding. I forced a smile, but inside, I was already unraveling. The moment that truly broke everything came just minutes later. Ethan accidentally spilled a little juice on the table. Barely anything, just a small orange stain spreading across the white cloth. But the reaction, it was instant and brutal. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is exactly why children don't belong at formal dinners," she snapped, glaring at him like he had committed something unforgivable. Ethan froze completely. His tiny hands started trembling, his eyes wide with fear as he whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over again. But she didn't stop. "Sorry doesn't fix carelessness," she continued sharply. "You need to learn manners, or you'll grow up just like your mother, disrespectful and embarrassing." And that's when I saw it. The tears forming in his eyes, the confusion, the shame. At 5 years old, I should have stood up. I should have defended him right then and there. But instead, I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, not because I was weak, but because in that exact moment, something shifted inside me. The pain turned into something colder, something sharper. I looked at my parents, really looked at them for the first time, and I realized something important. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. And that's when I made a decision. Not out loud, not dramatically, just quietly, deep inside myself. If they thought this was acceptable, if they believed they could humiliate my child and walk away untouched, then they didn't know me at all. Because 2 days later, everything they thought they controlled would begin to fall apart, and they would never see it coming. We left that night earlier than expected, but not early enough to undo the damage that had already been done. The car ride home was painfully quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy in your chest. Ethan sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his small reflection barely visible against the dark glass. I kept glancing at him through the mirror, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he didn't, and somehow, that hurt more than if he had cried. When we got home, he quietly took off his shoes and walked to his room without his usual energy. No good night, Mom, no hug, no little story about his day. Just silence. I stood there in the hallway, watching his door close slowly. And for a moment, I felt completely powerless. But that feeling didn't last long. It twisted into something else, something focused. Because what my parents did wasn't just a moment of cruelty. It was a pattern, and I was done letting it continue. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, replaying every word, every look, every expression from dinner. The way my mother dismissed him, the way my father left, the way they both acted like it was normal, like it was justified. My hands curled into fists as I realized something I had avoided for years. They would never change. Not for me, not for Ethan. So if change was going to happen, it had to come from me. The next morning, I found Ethan sitting quietly with his crayons, drawing something on a piece of paper. Normally, he would run to show me immediately, his eyes full of excitement. But this time, he hesitated. "It's not that good," he said softly, almost like he was apologizing before I even saw it. That broke something inside me all over again. A 5-year-old should never doubt his worth like that. I sat beside him and gently asked if I could see it. He nodded slowly and handed me the paper. It was a drawing of our family, but something was off. There were only two figures standing together, me and him holding hands. And off to the side, drawn smaller and darker, were two other figures with angry faces. "That's Grandma and Grandpa," he explained quietly. "They don't like me." His voice didn't shake. That's what made it worse. I pulled him into my arms, holding him tightly as he rested his head against my shoulder. "That's not true," I whispered, even though part of me knew it wasn't entirely a lie in his mind anymore. "You are loved more than you can ever understand." But as I said those words, I realized something else. Love isn't just about what you say. It's about what you allow. And I had allowed too much for far too long. That afternoon, I made a call I had been avoiding for years. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, controlled, intentional. I spoke to someone who had helped me once before, someone who understood systems, records, and consequences. I didn't go into full detail right away. I simply asked questions, careful ones, the kind of questions that start quiet, but lead somewhere irreversible. Then I did something else, something my parents never expected me to do. I went through old documents, emails, financial records, things I had access to but never bothered to look at closely. My father had always been proud of his perfect image, his reputation, his standing in the community. But perfection, I've learned, is usually just well-hidden truth. And the more I looked, the more I started to see cracks. By the end of that day, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even emotional. I was clear, focused, patient. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't happen in the moment. It builds quietly, piece by piece, until the right moment arrives. And when it does, it doesn't just hurt. It changes everything. 2 days, that's all it took. And by the time my parents realized what I had done, it was already too late. The second day began like any other. But there was a strange calm inside me that hadn't existed before. It wasn't peace. It was clarity. The kind that comes after you finally accept a truth you've been avoiding for years. I made Ethan his breakfast, tied his shoelaces, and kissed his forehead before school, holding that moment a second longer than usual. He smiled faintly this time, not fully healed, but trying. And that was enough to remind me exactly why I was doing this. Once he left, I stepped back into the version of myself my parents never believed I could be. Focused, strategic, unemotional. I gathered everything I had found the night before: documents, scan emails, transaction records, and laid them out like pieces of a puzzle. At first, it had just been curiosity, but now it was undeniable. There were inconsistencies, numbers that didn't align, transfers that didn't make sense. My father's perfect image suddenly looked manufactured. I remembered all the times he bragged about his integrity, about how reputation was everything. People respect what they believe is flawless, he used to say, and that was the problem. It was all belief, not truth. As I dug deeper, I found something that made my hands pause mid-motion, a series of financial movements tied to accounts that weren't publicly declared. Quiet transactions, carefully spaced, but not careful enough. I didn't react right away. I didn't panic or celebrate. I just sat there, staring at the screen, letting the reality settle in. This wasn't small. This wasn't something that could be brushed off or explained away with a smile at dinner. This was the kind of truth that didn't just crack an image, it shattered it completely. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to control. But I wasn't reckless. I knew better than to act without precision. So I made another call, this time more direct. I shared only what was necessary, enough to confirm what I already suspected. The voice on the other end grew quieter as I spoke, more serious with every detail. If this is accurate, they said carefully, this could lead to a formal investigation. I didn't respond immediately. I just listened. And then I said, it is. That afternoon, I received a message from my mother, short, casual, as if nothing had happened 2 nights ago. Don't forget Chloe's engagement dinner tomorrow. Be on time, no apology, no acknowledgement, just expectation. I stared at the message for a long moment, then locked my phone without replying, because that dinner, that perfect, public celebration, was exactly where everything needed to unfold. Later that evening, Ethan sat beside me on the couch, quietly watching his favorite cartoon. He leaned against me, resting his head on my arm, and whispered something so soft I almost missed it. Mom, am I bad? The question hit harder than anything my parents had ever said to me. I turned to him immediately, my heart tightening as I gently lifted his chin so he would look at me. No, I said firmly, my voice steady, but filled with something deeper. You are kind, you are good, and you are stronger than you know. He studied my face for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then slowly, he nodded, and in that small, fragile moment, I made a silent promise. No one would ever make him feel that way again, not even my own family. That night, as everything quietly fell into place behind the scenes, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about breaking a cycle, ending something that should have never been allowed to continue. And the next day, in front of everyone they cared about, my parents were going to face the truth they could never control. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. The night of Chloe's engagement dinner arrived dressed in perfection, the kind my parents spent years carefully curating. The venue shimmered with soft gold and lights, crystal glasses clinking gently as guests laughed and admired the setup. Everything looked flawless on the surface, exactly how they liked it. I walked in holding Ethan's hand, feeling his small fingers tighten around mine as his eyes scanned the room nervously. I bent down slightly and whispered, "Stay close to me, okay?" He nodded, trusting me completely. My mother spotted us almost immediately, her smile polished and artificial as ever. "You're late," she said under her breath, not even greeting Ethan. My father stood nearby, shaking hands and laughing with guests, playing his role perfectly. Chloe looked radiant, surrounded by attention, her happiness glowing under the spotlight. And for a moment, I simply observed the image, the illusion, the performance, because that's all it was. A carefully constructed lie. We took our seats, and just like before, Ethan was barely acknowledged. Conversations flowed around us, but never to us. I could feel him shrinking beside me again, his shoulders slightly hunched, his voice quiet. But this time, I was ready. I wasn't here to endure. I was here to end something. Calmly, patiently, I reached into my bag and checked my phone. One message. That's all it took. I typed it slowly, deliberately, and pressed send. About 20 minutes later, just as my father stood up to make a speech, everything shifted. At first, it was subtle. A man entered the venue quietly, followed by another. Their presence didn't match the celebration. Their expressions were serious, focused. My father noticed them mid-sentence, his voice faltering for just a second before he forced a smile. "Excuse me," he said, trying to maintain control as they approached him directly. The room began to quiet down, curiosity spreading like a ripple through the guests. My mother's smile froze as she watched the interaction unfold. One of the men spoke calmly, firmly, showing identification. His voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "We need to speak with you regarding some financial discrepancies." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. My father's face changed instantly. Not anger, not confusion. Fear. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice tighter now, less confident. But they didn't answer publicly. Instead, they handed him a document. I watched from my seat, completely still, as his hand slightly trembled while reading it. The man he had spent years pretending to be was collapsing in real time. Guests began whispering, eyes shifting, the perfect atmosphere cracking at the edges. My mother stepped forward, trying to regain control. "There must be some mistake," she insisted sharply, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention. But it was already too late. Control had slipped from their hands, and for the first time, they couldn't fix it with a smile or a dismissive comment. Chloe stood frozen, her engagement night unraveling in front of her, confusion written all over her face. And then, my father looked up. His eyes scanned the room quickly, searching, calculating, until they landed on me. And in that exact moment, something passed between us. Not a word was spoken, but he knew. He knew this wasn't random. He knew this didn't just happen. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I simply held his gaze, calm, steady, unshaken. Because 2 days ago, he humiliated a 5-year-old child. And tonight, the truth humiliated him. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was suffocating. The kind of silence that forces everyone to confront what they just witnessed, whether they want to or not. My father stood there, no longer the confident man who controlled every room he walked into. His posture had changed, his shoulders slightly lowered, his expression cracked, and for the first time in my life, he looked small. My mother tried to speak again, but her voice didn't carry the same authority anymore. It wavered, uncertain, almost desperate. "This is a misunderstanding," she repeated, but no one rushed to agree with her. The guests weren't smiling anymore. They weren't admiring. They were watching, judging, whispering. That perfect image they had spent decades building was dissolving in front of everyone, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Chloe stepped back slowly, her engagement ring catching the light as her hand trembled slightly. "Dad, what is this?" she asked, her voice breaking under the weight of confusion and embarrassment. But he didn't answer her. He couldn't, because there was no version of the truth that would protect him anymore. Not tonight. Not after everything that had surfaced. The illusion was gone, and reality doesn't negotiate. I felt Ethan's hand tighten around mine again. But this time it wasn't out of fear. He was watching quietly, his small face serious, trying to understand what was happening. I gently squeezed his hand back, grounding him, reminding him that he was safe. That this moment, was not chaos. It was consequence. And as I looked down at him, I realized something deeply important. He wasn't shrinking anymore. Then my father spoke, finally, his voice low and strained. "You did this," he said, not loudly, but directly at me. There was no accusation left in it, just realization. I didn't deny it. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood up slowly, holding Ethan's hand as I faced him fully. The room watched, waiting, holding its breath for what would come next. "You humiliated my son," I said calmly, my voice steady, cutting through the tension without needing to rise. "You made a 5-year-old feel small, worthless, in a room where he should have felt safe." I paused, letting the words settle, letting everyone hear them clearly. "You taught him that love in this family is conditional, that respect has to be earned by being perfect." My eyes didn't leave his. My mother tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. No, I said firmly, turning to her briefly. You don't get to dismiss this like you always do. The sharpness in my tone silenced her instantly. Years of quiet endurance had turned into something unmovable. I spent my whole life accepting this behavior, letting you define my worth. But I will not let you do that to him. There were no dramatic gestures, no shouting, just truth, raw and undeniable. And that's what made it powerful. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was setting a boundary, a final one. This isn't revenge, I continued. Softer now, but even more firm. This is accountability. This is what happens when actions finally meet consequences. No one clapped. No one spoke, but everyone understood. I looked down at Ethan, who was now looking up at me with something I hadn't seen in days. Certainty, trust. I smiled gently and squeezed his hand again. Let's go, I whispered, and together we walked out of that room, leaving behind everything that had once defined me, but no longer controlled me. 2 days. That's all it took to change everything. And as we stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, but freedom. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight louder. It's to stop accepting what was never right in the first place. And from that moment on, I chose better. For him, for me, for the life we both deserved.